Dave Reynolds had never considered himself special. Actually, that wasn't entirely true. His mother had always told him he was special, but in that way mothers do when their child eats paste or tries to flush a hamster down the toilet. Special, but not in a good way. So it came as quite the surprise when the United Earth Diplomatic Corps requested his presence for the 7th time this month. The message flashed across his neural implant with an urgency indicator that seemed excessive for someone whose previous job had been assistant customer experience manager at a chain of automated coffee shops. Mr. Reynolds, your presence is requested for the Trilaxian Peace Summit. Transport will arrive in 30 minutes. Dave blinked at his sparse apartment, still adorned with unpacked boxes from his hasty relocation to the Diplomatic Corps headquarters in New Geneva. He hadn't even had time to assemble his entertainment unit. This has to be a mistake, he muttered to his empty apartment. I was only supposed to be at that first meeting as a cultural observer, that first meeting. The one where humanity, barely 50 years into faster-than-light travel, had somehow secured favorable trade terms with the Vexnar Empire, a civilization so ancient they measured their history in geological epochs rather than years. Dave had been there only because the regular diplomat had food poisoning, and Dave happened to be in the right corridor at the wrong time. His implant pinged again. Mr. Reynolds, please confirm receipt. Yeah, I got it. Dave sighed, knowing the AI would interpret his casual acknowledgement as formal confirmation. He shuffled to his closet and pulled out the one formal outfit he owned, a charcoal gray suit that the Corps had provided him after his first successful negotiation. The quotation marks were important in Dave's mind because he still wasn't sure what he'd done right. He'd mostly just been himself, which historically had never been the correct choice in professional settings. As he dressed, he caught sight of his reflection: average height, average build, unremarkable brown hair that never quite laid flat on the right side. His one distinguishing feature was what his ex-girlfriend had called his resting sarcasm face, a slight smirk that made him look perpetually on the verge of making an inappropriate joke. Which, to be fair, he usually was. The transport arrived precisely on time, a sleek, silent hoverpod that settled outside his window. As Dave climbed in, he found himself facing Director Elaine Chambers, the stern-faced head of the Diplomatic Corps' Extraterrestrial Relations Division. Reynolds, she acknowledged, not looking up from her datapad. Director, Dave replied, trying to sound professional. So, am I ever going to find out why I keep getting dragged to these things? I have zero diplomatic training, and my background is in selling overpriced coffee to sleep-deprived commuters. Director Chambers finally looked up, her expression unreadable. You possess certain qualities that we find valuable in these particular negotiations. Like what? My charming personality, my extensive knowledge of 21st century memes, my ability to recite pi to 30 decimal places when I'm nervous. Your results speak for themselves, Reynolds, she replied flatly. 7 successful negotiations in situations where our most experienced diplomats predicted failure. Dave shifted uncomfortably. I honestly have no idea what I'm doing right. That, said Director Chambers with the ghost of a smile, is precisely what makes you valuable. The transport banked sharply, giving Dave a view of the massive cylindrical structure that housed the Galactic Diplomatic Convention Center. Built in Earth orbit as a gesture of goodwill after humanity's admission to the Galactic Council, it resembled nothing so much as a giant silver suppository floating in space. Dave had made that observation exactly once during a briefing. The resulting silence had been so profound he could have heard a photon drop. As they docked, Director Chambers finally put her datapad away. The Trilaxians are notoriously difficult negotiators. They've been at war with the Phobos Collective for 3 centuries over mining rights to a single asteroid belt. We need this peace treaty to succeed, Reynolds. No pressure then, Dave muttered. One more thing, Chambers added as they stood to exit. The Grand Vizier of the Xanthi Concordat specifically requested your presence. Dave froze. The who of the what now? The Xanthi. They control approximately 1/3 of the known galaxy. Their Grand Vizier is essentially the most powerful being in this sector of space. And they asked for me. By name? Director Chambers nodded, her expression grave. Not just you. They asked for the human who doesn't speak like the others. Apparently word has spread. Dave felt a bead of sweat form at his temple. Spread about what? I literally just sit there and occasionally say what everyone's thinking, but is too polite to say out loud. Exactly, said Chambers as the door slid open. And for reasons we don't fully understand yet, that makes you the most feared diplomat in the galaxy. Dave's first official diplomatic mission had been a comedy of errors from the start. 3 months ago he'd been a cultural observer, basically the diplomatic equivalent of the guy who fetches coffee. His job was to sit quietly, take notes about alien customs, and most importantly, not speak unless spoken to. The meeting with the Vexnar Empire had been held in their massive battle cruiser, the Inevitable Conquest, a name that really should have been a red flag. The vessel was essentially a planet with engines, decorated in what Dave could only describe as intimidation chic. Every surface was either obsidian black or blood red, and the walls were adorned with what appeared to be the preserved remains of previous negotiation partners. "Are those taxidermied diplomats?" Dave had whispered to his supervisor, Ambassador Talia Wong. Schiff. Wong hissed. "Those are ceremonial effigies representing respected adversaries." "So, yes." The ambassador shot him a glare that could have melted tungsten before turning back to face the approaching Vexnar delegation. Admiral Krill of the Vexnar Empire stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms, iridescent blue-black skin, and a face that looked like someone had tried to sculpt an octopus from memory. He cut an imposing figure. His ceremonial armor appeared to be made from the polished exoskeletons of some unfortunate species, and each of his 4 hands rested on a different weapon. "Greetings, humans," the admiral's voice boomed through the chamber, amplified by some unseen technology. "Your presence here is tolerated." Ambassador Wong bowed deeply. "Most excellent Admiral Krill, we are honored by your magnificent tolerance and wish to express our deepest gratitude for this opportunity to discuss mutually beneficial trade agreements." Dave had been briefed on the Vexnar's love of florid obsequious language. Apparently in their culture, the more unnecessarily verbose you were, the more respect you showed. Dave, however, had spent the previous night reviewing trade proposals instead of sleeping, and his filter was operating at minimal capacity. "Do we really need the caps lock voice?" he muttered, not realizing his comm unit was still on. The room went deathly silent. Ambassador Wong turned slowly to face him, horror etched across her features. Admiral Krill's compound eyes swiveled toward Dave. "Explain your meaning, small human." Dave, realizing his mistake but unable to backpedal without appearing weak, another Vexnar cultural taboo, decided to commit to the blunder. "I just mean, we all have working ears, or whatever you call those." He gestured vaguely toward the side of Krill's head where elaborate sensory organs pulsed gently. "The shouting seems excessive, like compensating for something." A collective gasp went through the human delegation. Ambassador Wong looked ready to either faint or personally eject Dave into space. Admiral Krill stared at Dave for what felt like an eternity. Then, something unexpected happened. A series of clicking sounds emerged from the Admiral's throat region, gradually increasing in tempo and volume. "He's laughing," whispered one of the human xenolinguists in disbelief. "Compensating." Admiral Krill boomed, still clicking. "Yes, compensating. A humor concept about physical inadequacy projected through behavioral excess." The Admiral's 4 arms gesticulated wildly as he continued laughing. The other Vexnar in the delegation looked confused but quickly joined in, apparently not wanting to miss out on whatever their leader found amusing. "You," Krill pointed at Dave with one of his lower arms. "You will speak directly during these negotiations." Ambassador Wong tried to intervene. "Admiral, Mr. Reynolds is merely a cultural observer and Silence, Krill thundered. "I wish to hear more of this human's disrespectful honesty." And so Dave found himself seated at the main negotiation table, Ambassador Wong relegated to advisor status. The next 6 hours were the strangest of Dave's life. Every time he made an offhand comment or sarcastic observation about the Vexnar's ridiculous demands, Admiral Krill would erupt in that bizarre clicking laughter and make a concession. By the end of the day, Earth had secured trade rights that were frankly ludicrous in their favorability. Access to rare minerals, technology exchanges, and defensive pacts that the planning committee hadn't even dared to put on their wish list. As they left the inevitable conquest, Ambassador Wong grabbed Dave's arm with a grip that threatened to cut off circulation. "What the actual hell was that?" she hissed. "I have no idea," Dave replied honestly. "I was just being myself." "Well, yourself's just negotiated the best deal with the Vexnar in recorded history. The Admiral invited you to his spawn hatching ceremony." That's unheard of." Dave shrugged. "Maybe he just likes me. The Vexnar don't like anyone. They respect strength and despise weakness. Somehow, Your complete lack of diplomatic tact registered to them as strength. When they returned to Earth, Dave expected to be reprimanded, possibly fired, and definitely sent back to his previous life of serving caffeine to irritable commuters. Instead, he received a commendation, a substantial raise, and a new title, Special Diplomatic Consultant. No one, least of all Dave, could explain what had happened, but within weeks, word had spread throughout the galactic diplomatic community about the strange human who spoke differently from all the others, and the requests for his presence began pouring in. You called the Duraxian High Chancellor a discount Halloween costume. Plex's voice modulator somehow managed to convey both horror and amusement despite being designed for standard. Galactic. The diminutive alien's skin flushed a deep purple which Dave had learned indicated either extreme embarrassment or digestive distress. In my defense, Dave replied, adjusting his regulation diplomatic uniform, he did look like someone wrapped in aluminum foil with pipe cleaners sticking out of his head. The Duraxians evolved in a methane atmosphere with high radiation levels. Those pipe cleaners are sensory organs more sophisticated than your entire nervous system. Plex's forearms gesticulated wildly as they hurried down the corridor toward their next appointment. Dave had been assigned Plexinothelus Cavor, Plex for short, as an assistant after his third successful negotiation. The four-armed purple-skinned Minori was supposed to be Dave's cultural guide and unofficially his handler. So far Plex had failed spectacularly at preventing Dave's diplomatic faux pas but had developed an impressive collection of stress reduction techniques. The Chancellor agreed to the trade deal, didn't he? Dave pointed out. After throwing his ceremonial drinking vessel across the room and declaring you refreshingly malevolent. Yes. Plex consulted the holographic schedule hovering above their wrist device. We have 19 minutes until the Hralga Federation representatives expect us. Please, by all that's sacred in the universe, try not to compare any of them to Earth aquatic life forms this time. That was one time, and the ambassador really did look like a disgruntled tuna. Plex's skin darkened further. The Hralga evolved from apex predators. They consider themselves the most fearsome hunters in the galaxy, so I shouldn't suggest they'd make excellent sushi. I'm going to lose my circulatory fluid pressure. Plex muttered, the Minori equivalent of threatening to have a heart attack. As they entered the West Wing of the Diplomatic Corps headquarters, heads turned. Conversations halted. Junior diplomats whispered behind their hands. The Sarcasm dispenser is on his way to another meeting. I heard he made the Xanthi Grand Vizier laugh so hard one of his auxiliary hearts failed. They say the Quantum Coalition added a special clause to their security protocols specifically because of him. Dave pretended not to hear, but the whispers followed him everywhere now. 3 months and 12 successful negotiations had transformed him from diplomatic liability to diplomatic legend. The problem was no one could figure out why. Director Chambers intercepted them outside the conference room, her perpetually stern expression marred by an actual hint of concern. Reynolds. A word. Dave followed her into a small side room, leaving Plex nervously reorganizing their presentation materials in the hallway. The Hralga have specifically requested that you, and only you, represent Earth in these negotiations, Chambers said without preamble. No other diplomats. Not even Plex. Dave blinked. That's weird. Even for my new normal. Indeed. What's weirder is that the Hralga are known for their formal ritualized negotiation processes. They typically insist on at least 7 representatives from each party. So why just me? Chambers' eyes narrowed. That's what I'd like to know. The Hralga ambassador would only say they've heard of your methods and wish to experience them directly. Dave ran a hand through his perpetually disheveled hair. My methods? I don't have methods. I just say what I'm thinking, usually at inappropriate times. Whatever it is, it's working. Just be careful in there. The Hralga are intense. She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. There's something else. The diplomatic attaché from the Vexnar Empire sent a message this morning. Admiral Krill, is it about his spawn hatching? Because I really don't know what gift you bring to something like that. No, it was a warning. Chambers' voice dropped. Apparently, certain factions within the galactic community are taking a special interest in you. The message wasn't specific, but the Vexnar rarely involve themselves in the politics of other species unless there's a potential threat. Dave laughed nervously. A threat? Me? I'm a former barista who stumbled into diplomatic success through weaponized sarcasm. That's just it, Reynolds. We've had linguists, xenopsychologists and behavioral analysts reviewing recordings of your negotiations. They've developed a theory. Let me guess. They think I'm secretly a negotiation savant. No, they think most non-human species can't detect human sarcasm. At all. Dave stared at her. That's ridiculous. Admiral Krill laughed at my jokes. He laughed. Yes, but the analysis suggests he interpreted your sarcasm as bold truth-telling. To the Vexnar, stating uncomfortable facts in the face of potential danger is the height of courage. So when I said his ship's interior looked like a goth teenager's bedroom after a Hot Topic explosion, he thought you were bravely critiquing the aesthetic choices of one of the most dangerous military powers in the galaxy. Chambers almost smiled. The Duraxians interpreted your comments as malevolent honesty, a trait they deeply respect. And the Tralaxians thought you were employing an ancient form of wisdom speech where truths are disguised as insults. Dave sat heavily in the nearest chair. You're telling me I've been accidentally culturally appropriate by being completely inappropriate? In essence, yes. You're the diplomatic equivalent of a person cursing fluently in a foreign language without realizing what they're saying. Chambers checked her watch. The Hrolga are waiting. Just be yourself. Apparently that's working. As Chambers left, Dave sat alone trying to process this revelation. His entire diplomatic career was based on a massive misunderstanding. Every species thought he was employing some sophisticated negotiation technique when really he was just being a smart-ass. He was still pondering this when Plex poked their head into the room. Dave, the Hrolga delegates have arrived, and they've brought their ceremonial hunting spears. Plex's voice dropped to a worried whisper. All of them. The Hrolga negotiation went surprisingly well, considering it started with 6 7-foot-tall reptilian warriors performing what Dave could only describe as an interpretive dance with very sharp spears. By the end of it, Earth had secured exclusive mining rights to 3 previously contested asteroids, and Dave had been made an honorary member of the Hrolga hunting party, a distinction that apparently required him to drink something that smelled like gasoline and tasted worse. Word of Dave's diplomatic prowess continued to spread. 3 more successful negotiations followed, a technology exchange with the silicon-based Crystalline Collective, fishing rights in the methane seas of Titan with the Aquatic Nebula, and a particularly tense border dispute between human colonists and the insectoid hive mind of Proxima Centauri b. Each success added to Dave's mystique, though he now understood it was all based on a cosmic misunderstanding. His sarcasm, a defense mechanism developed through years of customer service and failed relationships, was being interpreted as everything from profound wisdom to sacred truth-telling depending on the species. The revelation should have made his job easier. Instead, it filled Dave with a growing sense of unease. He was an imposter, a diplomatic accident waiting to happen. Sooner or later, someone would figure it out. That someone turned out to be Commander Drath of the Galactic Security Council. Dave first encountered Drath at a diplomatic reception following the successful Proxima Centauri negotiations. Tall even for his species, the Arcturian had gray-blue skin stretched over a skeletal frame that seemed too delicate to support his massive cranium. His 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern, tracked Dave across the room with unsettling intensity. "So this is the famous Dave Reynolds," Drath said when they were finally introduced, his voice a sibilant whisper that somehow carried over the ambient noise. The human with the special way of speaking. Dave, already 3 glasses into some alien beverage that tasted like mint and sunshine, shrugged. "I just say what I think. Nothing special about it." On the contrary, Drath leaned closer, his 4 eyes blinking in unsynchronized patterns. "You've achieved what centuries of formal diplomatic protocols have failed to do. You've united species that have been at odds for millennia. Lucky accident, I guess. There are no accidents in diplomacy, Mr. Reynolds." Drath's thin lips stretched into what might have been a smile. "Only opportunities and threats. Which one am I?" Dave asked, suddenly feeling more sober. "That depends on how you're used." Drath's gaze flicked to Director Chambers, who was deep in conversation with the Tralaxian ambassador across the room. "Some see you as a curiosity, others as a tool. A few of us recognize you as something far more significant." "And what's that?" "The first human weapon that the Empire truly fears." Dave laughed, but Drath didn't join in. The Arcturian simply stared, his expression unreadable. "You think I'm joking," Drath continued. "But consider this. In less than 3 months, You've undermined centuries of carefully cultivated diplomatic advantages. The Vexnar Empire has never offered a trade agreement as favorable as the one they gave you. The Hralga Federation has never allowed a non-warrior species access to their asteroid belt. The balance of power is shifting, Mr. Reynolds. And it's shifting because of you. Dave set down his drink, suddenly not enjoying the party anymore. Look, I'm just doing my job. I don't have some hidden agenda. That's precisely what makes you dangerous. You don't even understand the weapon you wield. Drath's voice dropped even lower. Human sarcasm. Such a simple concept, yet completely alien to most species. They can't detect it. They have no evolutionary framework for understanding a communication style, where the literal meaning is the opposite of the intended one. So I've been told. But have you been told that certain parties are studying you, recording every interaction, analyzing your speech patterns to weaponize them? Drath's eyes narrowed. The Xanthi Concordat has dedicated an entire research division to understanding human sarcasm as a potential psychological warfare tool. Dave felt a chill run down his spine. That's ridiculous. It's just the way I talk. To you perhaps, but imagine being able to say one thing while meaning another, and having your opponent completely unable to detect the deception. It's the perfect diplomatic weapon. Before Dave could respond, Director Chambers appeared at his side, her smile tight and professional. Commander Drath, I see you've met our Mr. Reynolds. Her tone was pleasant, but Dave could detect the warning underneath. We were having a fascinating discussion about communication styles, Drath replied smoothly. Your human is quite educational. If you'll excuse us, Commander, Mr. Reynolds is needed for a briefing. Chambers placed a firm hand on Dave's arm, guiding him away. Once they were out of earshot, her professional demeanor dropped. Whatever Drath told you, be careful. The Arcturians have their own agenda, and it rarely aligns with humanity's best interests. He said the Xanthi are studying me to weaponize sarcasm, Dave said, still processing the conversation. Chambers' expression confirmed his fears before she could speak. We've been tracking unusual data collection during your negotiations. Nothing we could prove officially, but yes, several species seem very interested in your communication style. Great. So I'm not just a diplomatic novelty, I'm a test subject for psychological warfare. Dave ran a hand through his hair. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're effective precisely because you don't think about it, Chambers replied. The moment you become self-conscious about your sarcasm, it loses its authenticity, and authenticity is what makes it work. Dave watched as Drath glided across the room to speak with a group of Xanthi representatives. He said, I'm the first human weapon the Empire truly fears. Chambers followed his gaze. That might be the one truthful thing Drath told you. The Galactic Empire has technologies we can barely comprehend, military might beyond our wildest imaginings. But they've never encountered a species that communicates the way humans do, with layers of meaning and subtext. It unsettles them. So what happens now? Now, Chambers said, her expression grave. You prepare for the biggest challenge of your accidental diplomatic career. The Three Systems Peace Summit begins tomorrow, and you've been specifically requested by all parties. All parties, including the Xanthi. Especially the Xanthi. Chambers' eyes met his, and Commander Drath will be there as the Security Council's observer. Dave downed the rest of his strange alien drink in one gulp. Well, that's just perfect. No pressure at all. For the first time he wondered if the aliens would recognize the sarcasm in his voice. From Chambers' concerned expression, he guessed they would not, but Commander Drath might, and that made him the most dangerous person in the galaxy to Dave Reynolds, accidental diplomat, and unwitting psychological warfare experiment. The Three Systems Peace Summit was held in the central chamber of the Galactic Diplomatic Convention Center, a massive room with a circular table that could seat representatives from 50 different species. Today, however, only 4 sections were occupied, the 3 warring factions, the Xanthi Concordat, the Vexnar Empire, and the Hralga Federation, and a small human delegation, consisting of Dave, Director Chambers, and a very nervous Plex. Remember, Plex whispered as they took their seats. The Xanthi believe silence indicates agreement. The Vexnar interpret extended eye contact as a challenge, and the Hralga consider showing teeth to be a death threat. So don't smile, don't stare, and don't shut up, Dave summarized. Sounds like my dating strategy in college. Plex's skin darkened to a deep aubergine. This is serious, Dave. These three powers have been locked in a territorial dispute for over 70 years. The disputed region contains 17 inhabited worlds and resources worth more than Earth's entire GDP. No pressure then. From across the table, Commander Drath observed them with his unsettling four-eyed gaze. He sat slightly behind the Xanthi Grand Vizier, officially present as a Security Council observer, but positioned like a puppet master behind his marionette. Admiral Krill represented the Vexnar, his massive frame dwarfing his aides. He acknowledged Dave with what might have been a nod, though with Vexnar physiology it was hard to tell. The Hrolga delegation, led by War Chief Kavex, sat rigidly in seats clearly uncomfortable for their reptilian frames, ceremonial spears placed precisely at their sides. Grand Vizier Thune of the Xanthi Concordat spoke first, his melodic voice amplified throughout the chamber. We are gathered to resolve the dispute of the tri-border region, with the human Dave Reynolds as our neutral facilitator. The Vizier's 6 eyes, arranged in a circle on his face, all blinked simultaneously at Dave. We have heard much of your unique wisdom, human. Dave cleared his throat, acutely aware of every eye in the room upon him. Thanks for the vote of confidence, but I should warn you all, I'm not a traditional diplomat. This is why you were requested. Admiral Krill boomed, apparently still unable to modulate his volume. Traditional diplomacy has failed for 7 decades. War Chief Kavex made a series of clicking sounds that the translation system rendered in a gravelly voice. We seek one who speaks truth without fear. The hunting grounds of our ancestors cannot be divided by those who speak with forked tongues. Dave noticed Commander Drath leaning forward slightly, his 4 eyes intensely focused as if recording every nuance of the interaction. Well, I'm definitely good at saying what others won't, Dave admitted. But before we start, I'd like to understand exactly what we're arguing about here. What followed was 3 hours of the most convoluted territorial dispute explanation Dave had ever heard. Each faction claimed ancestral rights to various sectors based on historical precedents that predated human written history. Star charts, migration patterns, and religious significance were all cited as justification for exclusive control. By hour 4, Dave had a headache and a sinking feeling that this dispute was fundamentally unresolvable through traditional means. Each side had valid claims. Each side had suffered losses. Each side was convinced of its moral high ground. Let me see if I've got this straight, Dave finally interrupted, rubbing his temples. You're all fighting over territory that none of you actually live in, based on claims from thousands of years ago, while the 17 worlds with actual people living on them are caught in the middle. A tense silence followed. Correct, Admiral Krill confirmed. That is a simplification but essentially accurate. Grand Vizier Thune agreed. War Chief Kavex made a gesture that the translator didn't catch but looked vaguely affirmative. Dave leaned back in his chair. Well, that's just spectacularly stupid. The silence that followed was so profound Dave could hear the environmental systems recycling air. Director Chambers closed her eyes as if in pain. Plex made a small whimpering sound. Then Admiral Krill began to laugh, that strange clicking sound Dave remembered from their first meeting. The human speaks truth. Our dispute is irrational. Grand Vizier Thune didn't laugh, but his circle of eyes blinked in a pattern that suggested surprise. You would characterize the sacred historical claims of 3 great powers as stupid. I mean, yeah. Dave was committed now. Look, I get that history matters. Earth has plenty of territorial disputes based on who controlled what land centuries ago. But you've got 17 worlds full of people who are actual living beings, not historical footnotes. They're suffering while you 3 argue over star charts and migration patterns from before my species invented the wheel. War Chief Kavex leaned forward. You suggest we should prioritize the present over the past. I'm suggesting that maybe, and this is just a wild thought, the people actually living there should have some say in who governs them. Commander Drath's expression darkened, but he remained silent. Unprecedented, Admiral Krill declared. The inhabited worlds have no standing in this dispute. Why not? Dave asked. They're the ones most affected by it. Grand Vizier Thune's eyes rotated in their sockets, a sign of deep thought among the Xanthi. There is logic in this perspective. Though it contradicts all diplomatic precedent, sometimes precedent is just another word for we've always done it this wrong way. Dave replied. War Chief Kavex made a sound that might have been a laugh. The human speaks with the wisdom of a hunter who sees past the obvious prey to the true target. For the next 2 hours, the discussion shifted dramatically. Instead of arguing over historical claims, the three powers began exploring models of shared governance, with representation from the inhabited worlds. Dave found himself moderating a surprisingly productive conversation about trade routes, resource-sharing agreements, and security cooperation, until Commander Drath finally spoke. "This is highly irregular," he said, his voice cutting through the positive momentum that had been building. "The Security Council protocols for territorial disputes clearly state that historical claims take precedence over current habitation patterns." Dave felt a surge of irritation. Those would be the same protocols that have failed to resolve this conflict for 70 years. "The protocols ensure stability and predictability in galactic affairs," Drath replied smoothly. "What you're proposing would upend centuries of established diplomatic procedure. Maybe some procedures deserve to be upended if they don't actually work." Dave shot back. Drath's 4 eyes narrowed. "You speak boldly for someone so new to galactic politics, Mr. Reynolds. Perhaps you do not fully understand the complexities involved." There was something in Drath's tone, a hint of condescension mixed with threat, that pushed Dave's last button. "Oh, I think I understand perfectly," Dave said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The complexities being that the Security Council benefits from ongoing conflicts that never get resolved because it justifies your existence and power. Must be nice to sit back and observe while never actually helping fix anything." Director Chambers sucked in a sharp breath. Plex looked ready to faint. But Dave wasn't finished. "In fact, I'm starting to wonder if the Security Council has been actively preventing resolution. Because three powerful civilizations focused on fighting each other are a lot easier to control than three powerful civilizations working together, aren't they, Commander?" Drath sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he stood. "The human," he said carefully, "speaks with surprising insight." Grand Vizier Thune's eyes widened, all six focusing on Drath. "What is the meaning of this, Commander?" "The human implies Security Council interference," Admiral Krill boomed, his tone dangerous. War Chief Kevex gripped his ceremonial spear. "Is this true, Arcturian?" Dave suddenly realized he may have stumbled onto something much bigger than he intended. His sarcastic accusation, meant primarily to put Drath in his place, had hit a nerve. Commander Drath looked from one delegation to another, then fixed his 4-eyed gaze on Dave. "Mr. Reynolds appears to have a gift for unveiling hidden truths through his unique communication style. Perhaps that is why certain parties find him so interesting." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Explain yourself, Commander," Grand Vizier Thune demanded. "The Security Council has had access to compromise proposals that could have resolved this conflict decades ago," Drath admitted, his voice eerily calm. "Strategic considerations suggested that a controlled conflict served galactic stability better than an alliance between three major powers. You deliberately prolonged our war." Admiral Krill rose to his full impressive height, all 4 hands moving to his weapons. Dave had accidentally exposed a galactic-level conspiracy with a sarcastic comment. As the 3 faction leaders turned on Drath with expressions ranging from shock to fury, Dave caught Director Chambers' eye. "Nice work, Reynolds," she murmured. "You just rewrote the galactic power structure with a single smartass remark." "Totally what I intended," Dave replied. For once his sarcasm was obvious to everyone in the room. The aftermath of Dave's accidental revelation was swift and dramatic. Commander Drath was immediately detained by a joint security team from all 3 powers, a historic first in itself. The Peace Summit reconvened 2 days later without Security Council observation, and with Dave firmly established as the primary mediator. Within a week the 3 powers had drafted the Tri-Border Cooperative Agreement, a landmark treaty that established a jointly governed region with representation from all 17 inhabited worlds. Resources would be shared, historical claims acknowledged but not prioritized over current needs, and a new multi-species security force would replace the competing military presences. As Dave signed the document as Earth's representative witness, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unreality. 6 months ago he'd been explaining the difference between a latte and a flat white to irritated customers. Now he was signing a treaty that affected billions of lives across 3 civilizations. The reception following the signing ceremony was held in the Convention Center's Grand Hall, with representatives from over 40 species in attendance. Dave found himself the center of attention, receiving congratulations in languages his translator could barely handle. Director Chambers appeared at his side, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Reynolds. You're the most famous human in the galaxy right now. All because I can't keep my sarcastic comments to myself," Dave mused, sipping what he hoped was compatible with human biology. "Still feels like I stumbled into someone else's life." Speaking of which, Chambers nodded toward the entrance where a delegation of Arcturians had just arrived. "The Security Council has sent representatives to formally acknowledge the treaty. No Drath, I notice." "No. He's facing an inquiry that will probably last longer than your natural lifespan." Chambers lowered her voice. "But that's not the interesting part. We intercepted some Security Council communications during the summit. Turns out they've been studying you, and by extension human sarcasm, very carefully." Dave raised an eyebrow. "Drath mentioned something about that. Psychological warfare potential," he said. "It's more than that. The Arcturians have instituted new security protocols specifically addressing human diplomatic personnel. They've designated a new threat category called subtext-capable species." "You're kidding." "I'm not. After your performance at the summit, they're convinced human sarcasm is some kind of evolved deception mechanism that gives us a unique advantage in interspecies relations." Dave nearly choked on his drink. "That's ridiculous. Sarcasm isn't a superpower. It's just saying the opposite of what you mean in a dry tone. To humans, yes, but to most other species the concept is completely foreign. They evolved communication systems based on directness and clarity. The idea that someone could say one thing while meaning another, and that other humans can detect this through subtle vocal cues, it seems like telepathy to them." Dave glanced around the room at the diverse array of species. How many of them thought he possessed some unique ability rather than just a well-developed sense of snark? "So what now?" he asked. "Now you become Earth's most valuable diplomatic asset," Chambers replied. "The human who sits in every negotiation room, the one the Empire fears." "Because I'm sarcastic." "Because you represent something they can't quantify or defend against," Chambers corrected. "A communication style they don't understand and can't reliably detect. To beings that have evolved with purely literal communication, you're essentially speaking in unbreakable code in plain hearing." As if to punctuate her point, Admiral Krill approached, looming over them with his impressive height. "Dave Reynolds," he boomed. "The Vexnar Empire request your presence at the Galactic Trade Council next month." "I'd be honored, Admiral," Dave replied. "Though I should warn you I still don't really know what I'm doing." Admiral Krill's clicking laugh echoed through the hall. "Your humility disguised as self-deprecation is most amusing. We shall add this as sarcasm technique to our diplomatic training." After the Admiral moved on, Dave turned to Chambers. "They're trying to learn sarcasm." "Every species is," she confirmed. "The Xanthi have established a Department of Human Communication Studies. The Harga are sending warriors to Earth specifically to learn the way of saying while not saying, as they call it." "That's going to go well," Dave muttered. "The Duraxians have already published a preliminary paper titled Sarcasm, the Human Stealth Communication." Chambers couldn't quite hide her amusement. "It includes a classification system for different types of sarcastic remarks and their potential diplomatic applications." Dave shook his head in disbelief. "So my entire career is based on the fact that aliens can't tell when I'm being a smartass?" "Essentially, yes. And now they're all trying to learn how to do it themselves." With limited success, Chambers added. "It turns out sarcasm requires a specific neurological framework and cultural context that's difficult to replicate without evolutionary similarity." As if on cue, Grand Vizier Thune approached them, all six eyes blinking in what Dave had learned was a sign of respect. "Human Reynolds," the Grand Vizier said formally, "I wish to express my non-literal appreciation for your invaluable contribution to our meaningless conflict." Dave blinked. Was that an attempt at sarcasm? Indeed. Thune's eyes rotated with excitement. "Did I perform the communication technique correctly? Our researchers have been studying intensively." "That was a start," Dave said diplomatically. After Thune departed looking pleased with himself, Chambers leaned closer to Dave. "See what I mean? They're trying, but they don't quite get it. The Xanthi just think sarcasm means saying the opposite of what you mean, not understanding all the subtle contextual cues that make it work. So I'm secure in my job as the galaxy's only effective sarcasm dispenser," Dave mused. "For now, we're fast-tracking other diplomats with your particular skills through training. But yes, you've inadvertently become Earth's secret diplomatic weapon." Chambers raised her glass. "To the accidental diplomat." Dave clinked his glass against hers. to the terrifying power of human sarcasm. May the rest of the galaxy never quite figure it out. As they drank, Dave caught sight of his reflection in one of the chamber's polished surfaces. Still the same average guy with perpetually disheveled hair and a face that looked like it was always about to make an inappropriate joke. Now the most feared diplomat in the galaxy, all because he couldn't keep his sarcastic comments to himself. Oh, and Reynolds, Chambers added casually. The diplomatic corps has instituted a new protocol of its own. Every negotiation team must now include at least one sarcasm-capable human. We're calling it the Reynolds rule. Fantastic, Dave replied. No pressure at all. Across the room, several alien diplomats nodded approvingly, completely missing the sarcasm in his tone. And that, Dave realized, was exactly why the Empire feared the one human who sat in every negotiation room.